Hey everyone, it's Astro with another market update, and today we're going to look at Bitcoin, the others chart, and some of the altcoins. Um, as you've seen, Bitcoin has had a massive push up, but we are at an inflection point right now. So the first thing we're going to look at is Bitcoin. So let's take a look. So on Bitcoin, you can see that we obviously have flipped a little more bullish. We are in an uptrend. We've taken out several of these highs, previous highs, taken out this high. We've also taken out these highs now. From a technical standpoint, we've taken out these three key highs. We're now trading above, or we were trading above that level. And as well as that, the whole move down, we are now trading above the 50% level. And to be exact, this move that we've had up, and why I say we're at an inflection point right now, is we have pushed up into the 66, so the top of the golden pocket, right to the 66% level, which is probably a level where there's going to be a lot of taking profits. And not only that, anyone that had to ride this move down were probably saying to themselves, if Bitcoin gets back to 90, 95, I'm going to sell. So that's why I feel, we are at an inflection point. This move up we had was very strong. A lot of people flipped bullish because we took out these highs. But at the same time, if Bitcoin was to, push up and now put in a lower low, I feel like this would be the area for Bitcoin to do that, either the 618 or the 66% mark. So I do think you've got to be careful, especially opening any longs in this area. I think, for the bulls, the big hope is that, we're due a correction for sure. The big hope is that we put in a higher low somewhere around, this 50% level here. So that's the 50% level from this recent swing low to the swing high. And that comes in at about 86,133. So that's an area I'm watching. You can see here I'm on the daily chart, and that lines up exactly right now with the 200 EMA. So if Bitcoin was to make an aggressive move down this week and kind of find support at that 50% level, 200 EMA, and then start reversing, it would be a good sign. But to be honest, anything is on the cards. Few numbers to look at. We have had 77 days down from the top to the low, and now we're almost 1 month exactly to the low that went in on April 7th. So 30 days, 31 days, 30 days is going to take us out to May 7th. So something I'll be looking out for is if we can put in a higher low around that 30-day mark and then continue higher. It does look like we have begun the correction now after that rejection off the 66 level. We have a little consolidation here. We broke out of that range, but now we've fallen back in. So this may, on the daily, this looks like it may just be a little deviation above this high over here at 95K. Deviated above. We've now broken down. What's also worth pointing out, we've gone through this in other videos, is the high from last cycle. So the two highs taking a trend line across. You can see how it held the market up really well when we were trading above 100K. It did wick down in, but it never closed below, and then we closed below. So now, not only are we trading above this 50% level from the correction, but we're trading above that red line, so that kind of trend line from last cycle. So there are a few things I'm looking at. Possibly we get that breakdown to the 50% level, then we may get a push back up to reject and continue lower. But it's worth pointing out, if we do break these levels, this 50% level, the bears will all come out. Everybody will get bearish. And if you've got a thesis on the market, what you think it's going to do, your own outlook, try your best to stick to that. So, if you believe that the trend has flipped and, we're likely to put in a higher low here and you want to bid it, at the 50% or lower, say the 618, the bottom of this demand, but we have an aggressive move down, you may, scrap your idea, you may become bearish, and then you start to doubt that we are going to put in a higher low, and you start to think that there's potential. And that's exactly what happened if you look back here. So we had this capitulation back in August. We had this good rally. Obviously, we didn't have confirmation of breaking these highs, but it was a good rally. And the second it started to pull back quite aggressively, the bears all came out. When we were dropping under 55K, right around here, everybody was calling for 43 as a new lower low, and we never got that. And that's when we put in this higher low. So I think, a corrective move now, if it's fast, will bring a lot of fear back into the markets. And you can see the fear and greed. It did get up into the greed at 70. We're currently sitting at 62 after a little bit of a cool off. So, tomorrow, Monday, we'll see how the markets open. But over the weekend, we haven't really had much volume to support the thought of, Bitcoin continuing to have a sustained move higher. The volume is quite low. You obviously want to look at when we are approaching previous highs before, what the volume looked like around this area compared to now. This move up through the middle of last week or the start of last week did have some volume behind it, but then we really dropped off. And this last little push didn't have great volume. So it does look like the market's slightly exhausted. It looks like we're going to get that pullback. And it seems like it started now. Looking at the alts, they're getting hammered pretty hard, some in particular. Let's look at the others chart here, which doesn't look too great, to be honest. So, what I've done here is, this is the others chart. This was August low. Basically for most of your altcoins, and Bitcoin, this is actually this is the others dominance chart. So this is when your alts were putting in a low, and you can see everything rallied, and this was that lower high on most alts and Bitcoin, but the dominance on Bitcoin was much higher, and that's why we put in a new low. Now, we are bear market territory, basically. We've already actually taken out the bear market low from, 2023 would be the low on this dominance chart. So basically, crypto bar Bitcoin is at its all-time lows in terms of the sentiment, the market participation in altcoins is just not there. And obviously people are still thinking, we're going to get that alt season. When's that going to come? Well, it's probably not going to come until Bitcoin puts in a new higher high or an all-time high. Maybe 120, 130 is kind of when you're probably going to start to see a shift over. So the Bitcoin dominance right here is just continuing to go higher and higher and higher. Realistically, if alts aren't going to perform that well and they're going to wait for Bitcoin to hit 120 or 130, you're probably going to have the Bitcoin dominance up into the 70% or 68 to 70% is somewhere where I'm looking at this thing topping out. If this thing tops out at 70%, Bitcoin is, for example, at 130. That's when you're probably going to start to see people take profits in Bitcoin. and start to look for, higher risk, higher reward plays towards the end of the cycle. That's normally what happens. That's normally when you see that alt season. So, really the alt season is your signal that the end is near, and you're going to have a massive parabolic 1 to 2 week run to finish out the cycle. So it's not so much that you want the alt season signal right now, because that's signaling that, there's not a lot of time left. So yeah, Bitcoin dominance here, looking at the 70% mark. Hopefully a lot of that move, still does pull the altcoins up. And hopefully a lot of that dominance, instead of coming from alts, it comes from this chart here. So what I've got up here in front of me is the USDT dominance, USDC. So just going to give you an update on my thoughts on this chart. So had quite a clear Elliott wave formed from that low that was back in December. So that was the altcoin all-time high, basically. And then January would mark the 2 corrective wave, and this was kind of when Bitcoin topped. And then from that point on, it's been straight up on this chart, which is obviously bearish on altcoins and Bitcoin. And you can see now we have had the key breakdown. We've had this break below the previous top, broken down, consolidated, broken down again. Now we found support off this 4 on the Elliott wave. So there is some strong support here. This is probably the most likely area to see a bounce and a push back up. Likewise, this is the most probable area for Bitcoin to find its corrective move at that 66% golden pocket. So, some targets that I think we're going to attempt to attack here on the dominance chart is this 7.92%. So that's basically just, 50% off this recent move right here. So 50% move. There's some supply here. So we're likely, if Bitcoin has its corrective move, this is probably going to push higher. If Bitcoin manages to hold quite strong, and this does push up to 50%, the chances are that's really going to hurt the altcoin market. And I would say you're going to find a lot of alts actually put in a lower low. Is quite likely. So something to keep an eye on. That's level 1, the 50%, and the 618, which is at 8.14%. And if things were to get pretty bad, who knows with the fundamentals and the tariff news. And we got the FOMC this week. So you got a lot of news coming this week, and that's kind of going to shape what the next couple of months are going to look like. So keep an eye on these 3 levels on that chart. Looking at some of the alts, we have Ethereum here. Obviously, it's really, really struggled this bull run from the get-go. Even though it did hit the $4,000 mark, the sell-off has been very extreme. We're a lot lower than we were back in the August low. 2,100 mark, roughly 2,100 marked that low, and we've already made it down to 1,369. So corrective move down. If we were to put in a higher low, similar idea to the dominance chart. If dominance is going to do a 50% pullback, that would probably have Ethereum in at these levels. If it was to hold, again, like I said, there's a high probability that most of these alts could technically still put in a lower low. So don't get too bullish just yet. And the last thing I want to go through is, obviously I am doing my challenge. We're trying to turn 3K into 1 Bitcoin, and I won't lie, we're off to a bad start. We haven't really taken too many trades. took one trade scalp on Avalanche, and we made 170 bucks on that. But we did take a position on Move in spot, and we took it at the worst possible time. If you don't know much about this coin, it basically got delisted on Coinbase just, I think it was on Thursday, and that caused that massive sell-off. This is exactly where we got in because the sell-off triggered our orders, and then before we knew it, we were already way down. Personally, it was just my thinking that I didn't want to exit in the middle of all the FUD. Just from a trader's perspective, you don't want to sell on the red, you want to sell on the green. We did hold. I was expecting a bit of a short squeeze because the funding rates were quite negative. Yet to see that, we're currently trading at 17.33. I still think there's a good chance we get out of this break even. So currently the challenge is not going too great. We'll keep you up to date on when I purchase Bitcoin and when we exit these positions. Right now, probably looking to exit around this trend line, so about 23.7, so that's about break even. So that's a little update for you on the Bitcoin challenge, the Bitcoin analysis. I think this week, watch out for, if the week starts green, one more push up on Bitcoin, possibly before then the big pullback. But that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like, subscribe. It helps the channel out, and I'll see you in the next update.